Wonderful. Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity again today. I say again because in a second I'm going to reference my prior visit to your country, and I want to talk a little bit about my talk in 2014. So it is really a pleasure to be with you. I'm just going to switch over to my presentation if I can. And can you see my presentation okay?
Yes, we can see it.
So I doctored very nicely the discussion about some of the forces and change in higher education. And she also gave you a number of examples of responses to some of those changes. What I'd like to do today is to reflect a little bit on a model that we might to accommodate and how to manage, how to strategize some of these changes. But first, by sharing some photos with you. 2014, when my wife Laurie and I were so gracious and made comfortable at Onujat at the very first conference. And at that time, I spoke about the impact of the e-learning transition and the transformation, the impact it was having on higher education. And I spoke about some of the disrupting forces we were beginning to see in higher education, such as micro-credentialing, peer-to-peer assessment, open online courses, or we refer to those as MOOC. So things have not slowed down since that time. We've see pressure from a number of disruptors and a number of new emerging technologies and capabilities. And that's what I'd like to speak a little bit about today, is how do we at higher education manage a barrage of disruptions and this barrage of new technologies. Think about and plan for change within our institutions. Part of that has to come down to a vision, and I'm going to talk about this model, which allows us to get to the point where we can perhaps define a vision informed by these disruptions. So first of all, I'd like to speak about the context, and thank you, Abdul, for your introduction. This is a good example, actually, of some of the changes in higher education. Recently, COIL became part of a new initiative at Penn State called So Kathleen referenced this so nicely in her talk as well. Higher education embracing entrepreneurship, technology development, both in the idea of individual product development, but also company development. And the EdTech network at Penn State is our response to embracing the academic and intellectual resources at the university and considering how we might embrace those in a way to advance educational system wholly. Now, for some of those, like me, this is a bit of a change. I came into education as an educator and not in the business domain. That was not my framework. But I'm finding increased interest and energy and excitement considering technology not only as a producer, and that's what we're embracing now within our organization. And COIL is proud to be a sponsor, a support agent for our EdTech network. So the measure of success in today's higher education is going to be on strategy. The strategy, we're going to consider the innovation planning, the structure and organization of strategy, and how we bring it upon to ensure that we have growth and success for both our also ultimately referenced as well the amount of change going on within higher ed. We are in a very fast, very rapidly, it's very difficult to keep up with the amount of adjustments, the pressures, both internally and externally, which I'll speak to in a moment. And how do we figure out, as lead action to take, to embrace, or which new affordance to use and to consider for application within our institute? First of of all, I just ask you to reflect for a moment. The digital world had education, and in particular, consider the speed that this has happened. In 19, Penn State began to consider the idea of digitalizing education. The consideration at that time was one of using technologies such as video discs. If you'll remember the large 9.5, 11-inch video discs we used, CD-ROMs were just beginning to be introduced. I think we were at the very early stage of understanding how the digitalization of education have an impact. And I don't believe in 1995 very many of us had the vision, the long-term vision, to realize where we would be today. And we understand today that digitalization has impacted every dimension of what we do in education, from how we design and present course content, to how we manage that information, how we serve it to our students, how we track our students' progress, how we assess their output, how we communicate. We use terms like flipped education, flipped classrooms, meaning that we provide access to information to students outside of the classroom in order that we can do different kinds of communications when we have them in the classroom. As I referenced earlier, the speed and the pace of this change of digitalization has been mind-boggling and puts a lot of stress and pressure on us as leaders. Finally, we have a variety of concerns that this domain has crafted, so we now are worried about more privacy issues. Some of these issues, for example, security of information becomes not only locally important to us within our institution, but also within states and in federal governments. Information is abundant. We realize it's not always correct, and we have to be very cognizant of how we're gathering that information, how we're protecting that information, and then finally how we're using it. So the model I'd like to present to you is a structure that a colleague of mine at the University of Pennsylvania and I have been using, how a group may manage, consider, strategizing and change, and we call it the formula for change. It has 5 variables, and it has a couple of factors internal to it, which I'll talk through. Now, you notice that the vision, the V in this model, is in the center. We've been asked, why doesn't this begin at the front end of the formula rather than in the middle? First of all, I should stop for a second and reference. This is obviously not a mathematical formula. So if you try to put a number into the D or the V, try to in the end. This is simple for an organizational structure to consider the variables in the change process. And the reason we have the V in the center is because the need to create vision is also always informed by the disruptions and the affordances of the technologies and the methodologies we consider. So as we are right now at Penn State, to envision a new state of education in the next 10 years. This is an active process we're engaged in. We've included students in this conversation, faculty members, administrators, and staff, to consider what might a digital environment look like for students. Now, it's very difficult for any of us to imagine the actual technologies, because who could have 10 years ago imagined what we are using today? And to try to do that would be a futile exercise. So what we're trying to do instead is to understand what are the disruptions within higher education, what are the affordances of the technologies and the methodologies, how can those two variables inform a vision, how do we then address the barriers and resistance to that kind of change, and how do we then take a new step or develop a new state. And that's what I'd like to talk with you a little bit today. So let's talk about some of the disruptors. These will be repeats, in essence, of what Kathleen talked about, because I think we're feeling all of these in all of our organization. We have concern about the number of students coming into our educational systems as freshmen and the percentage of those students who reach final graduation. Those decline in the ability to hold those students through the 4 years programs is alarming. So we have students who are leaving their educational system before they're achieving their academic goals, but having the debt. And so we've got a great concern about retention and attrition within higher education. Our internal resources, but also external, such as parents and government agencies, are putting increased measures on the accountability. What is a student able to do once they leave our higher education institutions in the workplace? Are they gainfully employed? Again, looking at the cost of the debt of higher education, how is that impacting the student's ability to make a living afterwards? We've already addressed, I think we're all painfully sensitive to the education which has outpaced even the medical field and insurance, the cost, by 2 to 3 times. We have a somewhat, what should I say, a dysfunctional relationship with workforce preparedness. In the past, the academy has not been as tied to the needs of the workforce, and we need to be preparing and tightening up this relationship so that when our students graduate, they not only have the core content of a particular domain, but that they also have work ethic and an understanding of what it means to be in a place of employment, understanding how teamwork variables of being a successful employee. Finally, we have what some have referred to as the unbundling of the educational model. So we have variables now where individuals can be receiving not only formal education through our higher education institutions, but also informal education. So we have free access to educational models such as MOOCs. In other variables, we also have for-profits that are now a large part of the education scene, and we're trying to figure out how do we manage the pieces and parts, if you will, of an educational system, and what will that mean for us as higher? Will we continue to be the single provider of the credentials that students need to be successful when they move into the workplace? So the affordances in the model.
Dr. Ragan, sorry to interrupt. We have 3 minutes left to finish the talk.
So the affordances, yes.
Please.
Thank you. The affordances in our model references the technologies and the methodologies, and finding methods to embrace these and address the issue of the disruptors. When we combine these two, the disruptors and the affordance, that's the variable in between, we begin to develop new innovations and new approaches. Variables then contribute to, as I referenced earlier, technology in our classrooms. 2017, we're not sure what that will look like in 2027, but it is time to be and describing that and capturing the principles that we want to use that will help us model a movement to a new state. Once we have that side of the variable crafted, we begin to address what the barriers are. Mentioned as well, one of the largest barriers, I think, within higher education is the culture of the academy. The ability for the last 200 or so years to be a standalone entity. We are now facing times of change, and we've got to how the academy is addressing and serving the needs of our learners in preparation for a workplace, but also for the quality of life. Finally, we get to a new state. And the new state is really where we can begin to move closer to the vision and embraces the affordances of those technologies and those methodologies that allow us to begin to embrace the informal educational opportunities, the formal opportunities, and to craft a vision for a leadership model that helps our institutions move our students and serve our students in today's environment. So with that, I will end. I thank you for your time and your attention. I wish you the very best for your conference.